back in 1950, which was just 4 years after World War II, at the University of Washington, Stormy was going to college. And he was paying for college by going through the NROTC program, which was a way where young men could be trained to be officers, and then when they graduate, they get a commission in the U.S. Navy. That summer, they have a traditional midshipman cruise to San Diego. And it was on a small destroyer and slept in bunks side by side and worked on the ship. And finally, they got to San Diego, which was quite exotic for a boy from Seattle who's never been south of Oregon, to see palm trees and pelicans, and also to see all the Navy ships that came there. San Diego was a huge port after World War II, and it was just thriving on patriotic enthusiasm because they had done so well in World War II, and San Diego was a key part of it. Now, the women in town also felt patriotic, and the ladies' clubs would put on various dances and entertainments for the visiting midshipmen who would come in and out of the port, as well as sailors. And for the midshipmen, they held an annual dance, and for this one, they had to recruit some young ladies to come to the dance. So they did find some, or arm twist some sorority sisters at San Diego State University to come to the dance, although the ratio was pretty long odds on the men's part, maybe 10 to 1 for this dance. But Stormy walked in the dance, and the first thing he noticed was this beautiful woman, striking tall woman with dark hair and a beautiful red-orange dress, surrounded by midshipmen. And she's tall, so she was actually sort of half a head taller than many of these midshipmen. Stormy thought, wow, that was an attractive lady, and she looked like a movie star, especially coming from the Northwest, where they just did dresses flashy or interesting as Southern California girls. So he was quite impressed. Carolyn, on her part, was also impressed, mainly by his height, and he was a handsome man. But being about a head taller than all the midshipmen, she was quite attracted to that, since she was a tall lady herself. And actually it was convenient because Stormy came up and started chatting with her, and they were able to hold a conversation over the heads of the other midshipmen. After they've had a nice little conversation, he knew not much was going to be happening at the dance, so he handed her a card and said, "Would you mind writing your phone number on this? I'd love to give you a call." And she did, and then when she finished, she looked at the back side of the card and noticed that there was a couple other numbers of young ladies on the backside, which was a little disconcerting. But nevertheless, the next day the phone rang, and Stormy and Carolyn decided to have a date. Carolyn had her own car, which was quite a big deal in the 50s, but it made it quite convenient to drive for the date, and Stormy would have been stuck at his base without a car. So she took him, and they drove up to a roadhouse, which is north of San Diego. And Mel Tormé was playing there. He was a famous crooner, and he became a very famous crooner. Back then, he was just a popular Southern California act in maybe Los Angeles. But they went there for the first date to this roadhouse. And a roadhouse, by the way, is sort of like a nightclub where you had small venues, so tables and a little stage, and they'd have drinks and dance and listen to entertainment. When they came in, they listened to Mel Tormé. He actually played the drums, which sounds funny, but he played it softly and had a kind of a crooner's orchestra with him. And they danced, had a romantic dance, and had a terrific time. And then later that night, Carolyn dropped Stormy off at the San Diego train station because he had a very early train in the morning. So they said goodnight and just thought what a wonderful date they had. Stormy decided to sleep the night in a shoe shine chair because he thought there's no way there wouldn't be enough noise and ruckus or shoe shiners or something to wake him up in time for his train. I don't think he had alarm clocks in those days. And so he had a fitful sleep thinking about how wonderful a date he had. Later that morning, Stormy arrived in Los Angeles, California at Union Station,
And he got on the phone and called Uncle Harold, who said he had a special treat for him. He said all he had to do was to wear his uniform and meet him at MGM Studios. And Stormy was used to Uncle Harold being a bit eccentric. He was famous in the family and in a small circle of opera lovers because we think he's the only person who turned down a job with the New York Metropolitan Opera. He was a tall man, but he was not heavy, and they wanted him to sing Wagner for those 5-hour operas, and he just wasn't big enough to sing for that long. So he left to Hollywood, California, where he took a job, his own tutoring service for the silent picture stars who were converting to voice movies and needed help with singing and voice lessons. And he became quite a famous vocal coach. He even has a book out. You can see it on Amazon.com called Fundamentals of Voice. He was so he's quite famous for that too in our world. But he was also a bit eccentric. He wore a raccoon skin coat, which was kind of big in the 20s, and so by 1950 he was one of the few people to hang on to that fad. And he carried a bottle of maple syrup in the inner pocket, and he whipped that out for breakfast because he insisted on maple syrup for breakfast. Well, so Stormy showed up at Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios in his uniform and checked in at the main gate. Then he met Uncle Harold there, and Uncle Harold brought him to a door with a red light over it saying "Do not enter" if the light is on. But eventually the light turned off, and they walked into a very large studio which had basically a town and had fake rain machines and had all kinds of cameras set up. And he proceeded to watch them playing Singin' on the Rain, the famous scene. And at the time, it was just another shot in Hollywood, and Gene Kelly was obviously famous, but Debbie Reynolds wasn't that famous, and she wasn't in that scene anyway. And he watched it, and they were proud to have him there because he was in a uniform. So after that, and that later proved to be an iconic film, which just wasn't even, they didn't even know it at the time. So he got back on the train after that visit and came back up to Seattle to go back to school at University of Washington starting that September. At the University of Washington, he continued his studies in ceramic engineering, making bricks and learning about inorganic chemistry, as he called it. We called it the toilet engineering. And proceeded to continue dating the sorority girls he had dated with. They have these theme parties, and he had a good old time with his old girlfriends, but kept writing to Carolyn in a nice, cordial relationship on letters, but she was in San Diego and he was in Seattle, so he thought that was all that was going to happen with that. Meanwhile, back at San Diego State University, Carolyn was working on her statistics degree in classes mainly consisting of men and a bit boring engineering types. She came up with this idea of where to finish off her degree, and there was only two schools on the West Coast that did statistics, and one was University of Washington and the other was the one she was at, San Diego State University. And it was always a mystery why she picked University of Washington as the place to go to, but I think the story will reveal the reason for that. So she, out of the blue, in one of her letters to Stormy, she said, "I'm going to the University of Washington to continue my degree." And when that letter landed in University of Washington, Stormy was a bit surprised, and needless to say, the girls he was dating were also a bit surprised, thinking, who's this mystery woman coming up from San Diego? Well, she gave, in the letter, she gave Stormy a date to pick her up at the train station. And when she arrived in Seattle, she promptly stepped off the train and handed Stormy 2 galoshes that she had thrown up in. She brought her galoshes to Seattle, so she wasn't totally ignorant of the Northwest. But she got terribly motion sick on the train, and so that was the romantic beginning of their the relationship back up in Seattle. And Stormy took her to meet his father and mother in West Seattle. And Stormy's father was a bit of a joker, and he played a joke on Carolyn by serving her dinner and then asking her if her father was rich. And Carolyn replied that not particularly. And so Stormy's father promptly took the plate away. And of course, Stormy and his mother were horrified at this joke, but I'm sure his father had a good laugh about that. Then they started dating at the University of Washington, and in the fraternity system at the time, as you'd seen before, they tend to do a lot of theme parties. So they did, gangster parties, and they did pajama dances, and pretty soon he was exclusively dating Carolyn, and eventually here's another one where they had a Hawaiian party dance, and they got engaged. And then on this wonderful day of June 13th, 1953, they went through 3 ceremonies, all with the same flowers, which the family joke was to save money. But on Saturday the 13th, Stormy was commissioned as a naval officer in the morning, and then in the afternoon they both graduated with degrees from the University of Washington. And then in the evening, they both got married and went off onto their honeymoon to Ocean Park. That's the story of how Stormy met his match.